I'm super excited that you guys joined me today. I'm Angela Brown, and this is Live with Impact. This is the show where you get to learn to love, live with passion, and leave a legacy. I'm really excited about this because this is a series. Today's the first day that we've done this. This is a series that we've decided to do so that we can share some information with you that is very near and dear to my heart. I'm really excited to introduce you guys to one of the coolest people that I know on the planet. And this is a person that has been a mentor to me for as long as I can remember. Now, to set the stage, the night that I was moving away from home, I was 18 years old. I was living in Sandy, Utah, and I had just had dinner with my family, and I was moving across the country because I was going to be a nanny with a family named the Clarks. Now, after dinner, and I was all excited and I'm all wrapped up in myself, I go out to the driveway. And as I get ready to go, our guest for today follows me out to the car and he says, I want to leave you with one parting thought. And I thought, oh boy, here we go. What is this? In my teenage youth, I wasn't very receptive. But he said, as you leave your family and you go out into the world, what you're doing is you are an extension of your family. And everything that you do is a representation of your family. And so the things that you do need to be done with intention. Then he said, and I thought this was, oh boy, here we go. He says, you're going to live with the Clarks. And as you live with the Clarks, you're an extension of their family. And everybody that meets the Clarks are going to think that they're just like you. If you go to church, the church that you are a part of is going to think that everybody in the church is just like you. And if you should leave the Clarks and get another job, you're an extension of that company. And anybody that meets you is going to think that everyone in the company behaves just like you. And so as you move forward with this new part of your life, remember that it's important to live on purpose and live with intention. And then he said something really interesting that I've thought about every day for the last 35 years since I've been gone. He said, and I quote, you don't have to live with the Clarks forever. The Clarks are the family that I was going to be a nanny for. He said, but you do have to live with yourself forever. That's every day, every week, every month, every year for the rest of your life. That's 365 days a year for every year for the rest of your life. So be the kind of person that you want to live with and you won't go wrong. And that was my goodbye. And I love this because that was my introduction into living with impact. So I'm super excited to join to do this series and to join with you today. One of my mentors, one of my heroes. The world knows him as Omuugn, and I know him as my dad. Please help me welcome Omuugn.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. And thank you for reminding me of all of those stories. It's hard to remember everything all of the time.
Well, that was a particularly interesting story for me because I thought about it every day. As I left the house, I was like, "Oh, no pressure there." That's a big bunch of stuff to carry with me. But as I unpacked that over the years and as I thought about that, you're absolutely correct because people make a judgment on you and the people you're associated with based on how you live and the example that you lead.
Well, it's true. And I'm glad that you're a good example of our family. And you've been quite successful, not only with your business, but with your life, with your family, and a lot of the decisions that you've made. So I'm really proud of you.
Well, thank you. I'm curious as we start on this journey together because you've just written a couple of books that are in the Live with Impact series, and it's breaking down all these different philosophies that you taught and that I've grown up with and really have tried and practiced in my own life and tried to emulate. And so I'm curious where that started because many people just drift aimlessly through life and their thoughts just kind of flitter here and there, and it's not laser focused and it's not with intention. So where did that come from?
Well, I've always been an avid reader. And I went through the Mowgli series and the Hardy Boy series. And one day I got a hold of of How to Win Friends and Influence People by Andrew Carnegie. And then I read a book by Napoleon Hill called Think and Grow Rich. And I started to differentiate between what was entertaining and what was really valuable. And I found that in those books that I mentioned, that there were actually some things that I didn't want to forget. So when I was in junior high school, I started making book reports. And when I would read a book, I would mark and make a list of the things that impressed me, things that I wanted to remember. I remember at an early age that I realized that I couldn't read all of the books in the world. And so I wouldn't have time to read books more than perhaps once. And so I wanted to extract the meaningful things that I wanted to remember out of each book. And so I began to accumulate these book reports, and I could review a book report very quickly. It's kind of like a little skinny thing that came out of a big fat book that I could review frequently and remember. So that's really how I began.
I'm curious though, how often did you go back and review the notes that you made?
Well, in the beginning, it was easy because I didn't have very many notes. But over the years, I've accumulated a lot of book reports. In fact, the books that we're just publishing are actually extracted from those book reports. And so I tried to set a time every month that I would review some things. After a while, I couldn't read all of the book reports, but I've kind of put the book reports together by topic, by subject. And so as a subject would interest me, I would go back and look at those notes. And it sort of embedded those principles in me in a way that I could apply them and learn them. Learn and then apply, I mean. So yeah, I've been reviewing my notes all of my life. So it's kind of a daily study class with me. I go back through things that I've considered to be important, and I review those frequently.
Well, you said something a minute ago that really kind of awoke me, where you said, I knew that I wouldn't have time to come back and reread the book. And that's one of the philosophies that you shared with us growing up. And if there's one thing that I think about every day that's really followed me through the course of my life, is the concept of I'm not coming back. I'm not coming back to redo something that we've already done. And so for me, also reading the books, I also knew I wasn't coming back to a book either. And I don't know if you taught it to me or if I watched you do it or what have you, but I'm exactly like you in that every time I read a book, I'm marking up the book and I'm making notes in the sidebar, and I'm like, I'm not coming back. This is my time to read this book. And if I keep that book as a reference, it's because it's all marked to pieces and I've written in the margins. And do you also mark up books, or is this you just write the stuff in the book report and then you don't damage or deface the book, or how do you do?
Well, I use a pencil. In fact, this is the pencil that I use currently.
That's the good luck
And
pencil,
I will put a faint line on the side of the sentence that I want to remember. And then I will go back and type that into my book report. So I don't really write or take notes in the book itself, but I mark what I want to remember, and then I will type it in, usually in my own words, how it impressed me and what I want to remember.
And I like the fact that it wasn't word verbatim, that you took what you read as it applied to you and how you meant it, how it meant something to you in your life, and then you made notes on that. Share with me a little bit about that process.
Well, we all have our own experiences. Every person has their own belief system. And their belief system comes from cultural things, the way they were raised, what they've studied, people that they've met, books that they've read. And so everyone is kind of unique and individual in and of themselves. And so when an idea is presented to us, we see it through that lens that we have created, that kind of forms our belief system and our insight into things. We all have biases for everything. If someone mentions something like Joe Biden, your natural response is either going to be positive or negative, depending on your political views and your experiences. So you have to be aware of your biases. But as you read and learn things, you're going to interpret it according to that process that you have, that you form all of these associations and biases and beliefs. That's the lens in which you see the world. So when I hear an idea, I will write it according to my perspective. And I have a different way of creating my perspective than some. I've actually created a series of filters. And I have about 50 some odd filters that I can put an idea in, and every filter is a perspective that will let me look objectively at that idea and to see if it fits in patterns that fit into my belief system or as I have come to understand things. So the filters are kind of a way that I can step outside of my biases and see things from a more clear perspective. So when I'm introduced to an idea, that's how I take my notes. That's how I do things. I write down the idea in such a way that I can run it through my filters and kind of look at that idea from different perspectives. So that's kind of how I take notes and how I work with ideas that come to me through books or other mediums.
I find that totally fascinating because you're correct in that we're always evolving as people. And if we learn something at a particular window of our life when we have a very limited amount of information about that thing, then as we expand and we evolve, if we go back and we look at that same idea or concept, it can mean something totally different to us because, like you said, we're looking at it from a different perspective. And I've always found that interesting how, as kids, we know everything, right? We challenge our parents and we're like, oh, what do you know? I got it all
Absolutely.
figured out. And then the older I get, the more wise you and mom have become just in your wisdom and your experience. And it wasn't until, I don't know, I was probably in my 20s when I realized that it doesn't matter what I think. Mom and dad will always be 25 or 26 years older than I am. You will always be that much older, and you will always see things from a different perspective. I just thought one day I was going to like catch up to you and then we'd all be twins. But I love how you do that on purpose.
Well, in many areas, you've actually passed me. So you're at a point in life where I learn a lot of things from you, and I value your perspective and what you have learned and what you have accomplished, because you have excelled in areas where I haven't. And so we're at a place now where we're twins in a lot of different ways.
Well, thank you for saying that. One of the things that I find really fascinating about families, and this is really exciting, is that we all end up, we start at the same place with the same parents or the same upbringing or the same environment, but we all do learn different sets of skills. And where someone has a set of skills, that might be a weakness for another person. And it's really interesting to see how families are integrating if they're still wanting to work together and they're still wanting to stay close because they can help each other with the different skills or lack of them that they have by sharing what they know. So I think that's a phenomenal concept.
It is.
So I'm curious about the taking notes because as long as I've known you, you've taken notes, and it was something that you really encouraged us homeschooling us. And so as a homeschooler, I was brought up to think that taking notes and learning something was a currency. And I really admired that. And I realized even when I was young and I didn't have any money resources, that ideas were a currency. And oddly enough, I've ended up creating my lifestyle now and my living based off of that currency. And so share with me at the very first time when you realized, because you said you were taking notes and making book reports as a kid, but tell me about when you very first recognized that ideas were in fact the currency.
Well, I don't know that in the beginning that I saw it that way. Um, I innately wanted to excel. And so understanding things and being informed of things and learning how things worked were just important to me. And I had one brother who was 5 years older than I am, and he was very intelligent. And I wanted to be, in some respects, like him. And so I would read his books. I remember one Christmas, he got the complete works of Shakespeare.
Mhm.
And so when I was in junior high school, I went through the complete works of Shakespeare because I felt that would be valuable. And in those formative years, I went through and read all of the classics that were considered at the time classics. And that's just kind of how I formed my reality, was extracting the best ideas from all of the great literature. And as I look back, that literature wasn't so great in a lot of respects. A lot of it was sort of negative, and the works of Shakespeare, although written beautifully, the stories don't have really good endings, and there's a lot of characters in the stories that are depraved, and I probably wouldn't read that kind of thing today because I like to live on a more positive note. But I was very selective in my book reports. I only wanted to do things that were valuable to me, things that I could use in my own life. So that's how I differentiated things.
How did you decide what was important and what isn't? Because as a youth, when you're reading all these books, and many of them are required by the public school system that, hey, this is our required reading. How did you decide for you what was meaningful and what was just kind of something that could be left by the wayside?
Well, at the time, I've gained a lot of insight over the years. So at the time, I didn't have the full understanding that I do today. But uh, I didn't, in a lot of ways, I didn't come from an ideal situation in that my parents were not very well educated, and we were relatively poor on the economic scale. And so a lot of the perspectives that I gained early on were not ideal. And as I have experienced things through the years, I realized that there's a better way to live, with forming your own opinions and your outlooks that are based on different principles and um, things that are valuable. So I began to put together the things that I felt were valuable to me. And if I wanted to grow and progress and become like the person I wanted to be, these were the kinds of things that I want to remember and I want to incorporate into my life. So those are the kind of notes that I took. And like I say, I didn't realize I was not introduced to self-help, the genre. Uh, all I knew is that it was something that I wanted to incorporate into my life. And so that's the distinction that I made. Is this valuable to me? Can I implement it or not? And so when I did my book reports, they reflected that belief system that I wanted to incorporate these ideas and become a better person.
When you made the decision that something was of value to you, was it made on an intellectual perspective or a gut instinct perspective?
Well, I'm sure it was both. Like I say, we learn from our experiences as well as our knowledge base in our mind. So I've gone through several environments in my life where military service and corporations, and I've seen the characteristics of people with abusive language, with foul language, with bad habits such as drinking and smoking, and how they would look forward to weekends and how they would spend their time. So I just began to differentiate between sort of what was the natural flow for people who didn't really have a design or a blueprint for their life, and to see the stark difference between people who were successful and who were intelligent and had sort of put their act together. So making those differentiations were important to me. And so I began to differentiate between lifestyles and belief systems and those kinds of things. I suppose it's a look into reality. How do you define reality? It's really different for every person. Every person creates their own reality, the world that they live in, by the decisions that they make and the opinions that they have, how they're influenced by the news media or the culture in which they live. So I've always been kind of a rebel at heart, I guess. That's why we did homeschool when homeschool was against the law in the state where we lived. I felt that homeschool was a better option than the public school system, and we had more of a handle on what was taught and how it was taught, and we could express our own value system in the educational process. So, yeah, all of those things were very formative in me and how I sort of put my world together.
One of the things I appreciate the most about going through the homeschooling system, even if it was against the law, is that I learned how to think. And one of the philosophies that I was brought up with, and I'm not sure where you picked it up and when you picked it up, and I'm going to ask you about that. But I was really keenly aware that you were really focused on and encouraged us to question everything. And so there, an idea would be presented, or we would read something in a book, or we would hear something at church, or the neighbors would say something. And the goal was to question everything. Is this true? Does this apply to me? How am I supposed to use this in my life? Is this part of, the goodness of mankind, or is this the badness of mankind? And it's really interesting because to this day, I still question everything. Instead of just taking something like, "Oh, that's what we're doing now." I stop and I'm like, "Really? Is this what we're doing now? Is this what we should be doing now?" Where did you come up with that? And maybe how old were you when you started realizing that instead of just accepting the status quo, you were going to challenge things and you were going to have your own formulated opinion?
Well, I think it's a combination of things, really. When I was young, there were members of my family who were, they used tobacco and alcohol and pretty rough language. And so at an early age, I decided that I didn't want any of those things to be a permanent part of who I was. And so I was very careful as I started my own family to introduce a different reality where there was kind of a clear cutoff line of what was acceptable and what was not acceptable. In our home, for example, we determined what kind of music we wanted to listen to. And all of the kids wanted to listen to their own radio stations, and we had hard rockers and all different kinds of things. And I basically said, while you live here at home, you're in my kingdom, and I want my kingdom to be this way. And so we presented the classical music and beautiful music. I still struggled with opera. Mom really likes opera. And I have always considered opera optional. If you like opera, that's fine.
Well, opera is a lot like Shakespeare. There's a lot of the depravity that you speak of, and there's a lot of the sadness and the depression, but beautiful, beautiful music. It's just the lyrics that will make you cry.
Yeah, a funny thing about that while we're on the topic was in San Francisco, there were a bunch of homeless people who moved into an area, and it sort of shut the businesses down. And so one of the business owners began to play opera out loud and broadcast it into the streets. And within a week, all those homeless people had moved. They'd gone somewhere else. So,
Well, I guess that speaks volumes for the arts.
but there is beautiful music, classical music, uplifting music, positive music, and later downstream we'll get into some of the musical things, but music is a powerful way to influence how we think about things, what we remember, and so we tried to control that, and we controlled the language in our home. We didn't allow fighting, and my wife was the second oldest of 16 children, and so she had amassed a great amount of wisdom in how to raise children and how to schedule work projects and assign things, inspections, and how everything is to be done so that a family can operate smoothly. So I'm a quick learner in some things. So we just applied all of the correct principles that we knew in raising our own family. So those were the
I'm curious though. You said you applied these things in raising your family, but there's a moment in time where you go from learning something to applying something. And just because you read it doesn't mean you know how to apply it. How did you know how to apply the things that you were learning? Because that does not come naturally for many people.
In the book that we'll be reviewing in this series, it's broken into a couple different parts. One part is listed as wisdom, and one part is listed as insights. So wisdom is the principle, and insight is when you integrate that principle into your life. You have that aha moment where you say, this is how my life can change if I implement this principle. So it was experimental along the way. As we would learn new things, how to do things, we learned what worked and what didn't work, what was more beneficial or not beneficial. So it's a process of being aware and asking yourself, is what I'm doing working? Am I turning out the way I want to be? Is my family turning out the way I want my family to turn out? So a real key to everything is your awareness of things. And I sort of view things like a big puzzle, and every new element is a piece of that. Well, not even all the pieces go to that puzzle, but some pieces go to that puzzle. And so as you learn things, you begin to put the puzzle together and a picture begins to emerge. And you either like the picture or you don't. If you don't like the picture, then you need to stop and put together a different puzzle. And so you need to be aware of what pieces fit where and what puzzle you're trying to put together, and how all of the things that you're learning can be incorporated into that overall picture.
If that's true, would it be fair to say that if you didn't like the puzzle you were putting together and you were going to put together a different puzzle, that then the things that you're learning and the places you're focusing your time and attention could then be shifted to different things that you learn and different places where you spend your time and attention?
Well, that brings up a very important idea that we'll be pursuing. And that is, there are eternal or universal laws, and there are foundational principles. And no matter what puzzle or picture you're trying to put together, those things won't change. They are universal laws and foundational principles. And how you're trying to put things together will be your own picture of that. But if you stay on that firm foundation, then your puzzle probably will turn out okay. But if you deviate from those principles, you can get some you can go into modern art and some really strange pictures.
So if I hear you correctly, and if I'm understanding correctly, the puzzle itself, the frame of the puzzle, the way the puzzle pieces are cut out and the way they fit together are the fundamentals, and those all stay the same. The picture that's printed on that foundation is what changes. And so if you follow the fundamentals, or as you say, the eternal principles, then something is about to come right. If you just find whatever the picture is that's right, but you follow the fundamentals. Is that kind of what I'm hearing?
Yeah, our life is just a series of decisions that we make, choices that we make. And so if your choices are based on the foundational principles, you can create all kinds of things in your imagination. You've created your own business, and that's the picture that you've wanted to create. But the principles upon which that is based don't change. For your business to be successful, there are certain things that you need to have in place. And a lot of your siblings have different businesses, and their lives are different. Their families are different. Their pictures are different than yours, but the foundational principles are the same. So you can create any picture you want to create, but make sure that you have a good solid foundation upon which to build it.
I think that's a really key concept. And I want to stop on that for just a second, because the fundamentals never change. That's why they're called fundamentals. They don't change. And that's one of the successes that I found in business, is that regardless of the picture that's changing, the fundamentals are the same. Imagine, for example, if you go into a house and there are houses all over, big houses, little houses, apartments, condos. There are different kinds of houses, and there are fundamentals in every house. And I know this is a house cleaner of 32 years. Going inside every home, we expected to find an entryway to the house. There was a front door and usually a back door. There was a kitchen of some sort. There were bedrooms of some sort. There were bathrooms of some sort. Those are the fundamentals. You don't go into a house and they say, oh, hi, this is a house with only bedrooms. There are no bathrooms. There are no kitchens. It doesn't happen, right? And so I look at a home as like a set of foundations. Yes, the decor will change. The style or the size of the rooms will change. The way people use those rooms will change. A music room, a home office, a study, a bonus room, a toy room, whatever. But the fundamentals are always the same. And I think that's really key. And I'm so glad you brought that up, because as we go through life, if we learn to recognize the fundamentals and we hold fast to those, even though things may change, and of course it does, as you have kids that act crazy, or they move away from home, or now you're empty nested or whatever, like your life will evolve, but the fundamentals will always stay the same. And I think that's true for business. And if you hang on to those fundamentals and are strong in those, the weird little things that happen along the way, or the pictures that change, you'll have the grace and the knowledge and the wisdom to kind of like navigate those ebbs and flows of life if you stick to the fundamentals.
Yeah, I think a good example of that is a fundamental principle is to seek win-win solutions.
Mm.
That's a fundamental principle. And it applies to business, it applies to social interactions. Wherever you go, whoever you interact with, if you always are looking for win-win solutions where we both benefit from this relationship or whatever it is, then you're basically going to experience success no matter what the activity is. So the principle win-win for everyone is a solid principle, and it applies everywhere.
I think I moved away from home before you taught us that lesson. I spent years thinking I had to win them all. Like, 1 out of 10, I had to win all 10. And I don't know why. There was this period of my life where I kinda, like, fought for everything, and it's like, "It's gonna be my way." And then, I don't know where it was. Somewhere along the way, maybe I just matured, or I grew up, or maybe we had a conversation and then you shared this with me, or what, I don't know, but I discovered I did not, in fact, need to win all 10. I do not need to win 10 out of 10, and I do not need to win 5 out of 10. And so I started picking my battles more carefully. And so if there was a moment where I felt really strong about, no, 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 we're going to do it my way, there had to be a justifiable reason for that. But I find myself consciously, even to this day, like with my husband, for example, saying, "Is this a battle that you have to win? Do you have to win this one?" Most of the time, I'm like, "No, not really." Okay, so why are you fighting so hard? You don't have to win this one. If it would make more peace and between the two of you, you can come to an amicable resolve between the two of you, and it ends up just being a win-win for both of you. You don't need to win it all the time. And I find myself backing up more and more the older I get, going, you can win this one. It's not that big of a deal.
Well, it's okay to win all of the time, but the other person has to win all of the time also. So you need to find a way in which both people win. Like you say, you might have to compromise some things, but there's some benefit that will accrue to you in the compromise. And so you can both win, and one person doesn't have to win and the other person lose. You can both win.
Well, we decided, and I think it was because I do run a business out of my house, and my husband, oddly enough, is affected by that. I've got about 10 people that come to my house every day to work out of my house. So he's affected by that. But one of the things that has worked really well for us, though, instead of, and I guess it's that win-win compromise, is that we've broken up different areas of our lives on a 49-51 ratio, not 50-50, but 49-51. Here's how it works. If, for example, it's a money issue and I want to buy something either for the business or for the home, it defers to his 51%. He gets the final say because he has more experience in business and finance than I do. He mastered in this in school. He has the degrees. He's been working in finance for as long as we've been married. And so he gets the 51 say. I can sell him all I want on my 49%. But if he wants to override that decision, we've already defaulted to he gets the final say when it comes to how the money is spent. Now, that said, if we're talking about vacuums, I get the 51%. So if he just falls in love with this really cool something he saw on an infomercial, I'm the one that gets the final say because I have more experience than he does in that particular area. And so we've broken up our lives into all these weird little compartments, and it's 49-51. So that instead of us arguing to the bitter death of 50-50, oh no, it's going to be my way, it's 51-49. And then I'm like, he's got the final say. Let's wrap this up and roll with his idea.
Well, it's nice that you have found a common ground that works. And that's the key, to find something that works and is successful, and don't try to do something that doesn't work. A lot of people are unhappy with their lives and the way things are going, and they don't stop to become aware of why. They don't ask themselves the pertinent questions. So if it's working, that's wonderful.
So you just brought up an interesting question. They don't stop to ask themselves the question, why? At what point of a negotiation or an agreement, when maybe you're fighting for a win-win and it's not happening, at what point do you stop and you ask yourself different questions in order to re-navigate that situation?
Well, it just depends on your degree of awareness. Some people are aware of everything. It's called mindfulness. Mindfulness is where you're just simply aware of where you are, what you're doing, what's going on around you, and how everything fits together. A lot of people kind of fly by the seat of their pants on everything. They don't know exactly what they're doing or why they're doing it or where they're doing it or around whom they're doing it. So yeah, it's developing that. We'll be talking later about mindfulness and how impactful it is. But yeah, you need to be aware as quickly as possible of every situation that you're in.
So I'm curious, this is not the norm for most of the people that I've ever met in my entire life, to be conscious, to be living intentionally, and to be mindful. How did you get to be this way?
Well, it's this whole thing began. This particular book series began when I was in a class, and the teacher said, "Who are we really?" And I thought that was a very profound question. And the teacher was looking for a very superficial answer. And so the class went on, but that question stayed with me. And so I asked myself, who am I really? And so I began to make a list of who I really was. And I came up with, I think, 58 different things that I was. And then I asked myself the question, if that's who I am, then I need to ask myself the question, where am I in all of those things? And then the question came to me, where should I be in all of those things? Which brought me to what the book is about, which was, we're actually a compilation of a whole bunch of different characteristics. And those characteristics form the nature of who we really are. And it's kind of like every characteristic is a thread that forms a tapestry. And the tapestry is the essence of our lives. Some tapestries are very plain, and some are very intricate with a lot of different designs. And there's a lot of thought that goes into some of the tapestries. So the idea was to look at each one of the characteristics that form who we are. And then I learned a principle a long time ago, that the more general the question, the more meaningless the answer. So if you go to very specific things, like one of the things that we'll be talking about is abundance. If you look at abundance very specifically, then you'll come up with a certain understanding. If someone comes up to you and says, "How are you?" Well, abundance is part of that, but your response to "How are you?" is, "Oh, I'm fine." So you never really talk about abundance, or you never become specific with that area. So if you can take your characteristics and break them down into each characteristic, and then each characteristic has layers, and you can go deeper and deeper and deeper into each layer, your understanding becomes profound, especially in comparison to those who don't look at any of the layers. They just live in a world of generalities. So that's the way I have begun to look at things. And it's been very, very helpful for me, because I don't see anything as the final result. It's a layer of my understanding at the present time. And so I can take it deeper, or I can go to the next thing. And I've learned also that you can't dig too deeply into one area and neglect all of the other areas. We are a compilation of all of those characteristics, and so they all need to be addressed. So there needs to be at least a fundamental awareness of each of the areas of our characteristics. And we need to have some basic things in place according to universal laws and foundational principles in every characteristic area of our lives. And then we can start digging deeper into all of those areas. But there's some kind of a balance that keeps our life balanced.
And that is an excellent question. And so I have to ask, how do you know when to stop digging so deep and go on to the next topic?
Well, I think a lot of it is going back to your awareness. If things are working in your life and you have an area that is working and you're basically happy, you can go on to something else that's maybe not working as well. One of the guidelines for me is my level of excitement. If I'm really interested in an area and I'm excited about it, it's kind of a prod for me to dig deeper into that area and to learn more about it. And so it's kind of a balancing situation between what I should be studying and what I want to study, what I need to study. I have to be aware of all of those factors. And so that's how I do it. If I'm excited about something, I will research it and delve into that area because I'm excited about it. And I seem to gain a lot of insight doing that, learning about different aspects as I'm excited about them.
But I think that's true for everything. I think when you are passionate about something, and we talk about live with passion, when you're passionate about something and you're interested in it, it almost seems like you're on a particular wavelength where everything in the universe starts finding its way to you on that particular topic. I know, for example, that they play the game in corporate seminars where they say, don't think of the yellow bus. And then all you can think about is the yellow bus, right? They put something inside your mind. And as soon as you became aware of it, you go out on the street and what do you see? You see a yellow bus. Oh, you turn a corner, there's another yellow bus. We don't see yellow buses around very often, but suddenly there they are everywhere we look because now they're coming into our awareness. And I think, like you said, it's with the mindfulness where you start paying attention to that, whatever it is that's exciting you at that moment. I think you then start attracting more of that to you. Is that something that you've discovered as well?
That takes us into the area of resonant frequencies, which is an area that I'm excited about. Uh, it's like tuning into a radio station or a television station or a channel on the internet. You can tune into whatever you want to tune in on. And when you tune into that channel, you're going to experience everything that's broadcasting on that channel. And you don't really experience things that are on other channels. So the resonant frequency, there's a resonant frequency for everything. And so if you decide what you want to experience, you tune into that frequency, and that's what you will begin to experience. And there was a Russian by the name of Grigory Grabovoi who found that everything has its own particular resonant frequency. Like your knee has 11 different parts, and each part has its own frequency. And if you're having trouble with one part of your knee, you can tune that frequency for a healing. And he's very successful in what he does. But yeah, resonant frequencies are the key to everything. The universal law is like attracts like, which means that this resonant frequency will bring you everything on that frequency. And so, yeah, that's a true principle.
Oh, this is exciting. I'm just loving this conversation already. So I'm curious as you talk about implementing things in your life, and you talked about learning stuff with passion and then moving on. How do you know when it's time to move on? Because I know sometimes I can get so focused and so caught up in something and I'm so excited about it that I do want to forget everything else. And I like to forget like dinner has to be cooked and I got to go rotate the laundry and all those fun things. How do you know when it's time to stop and let go and move on?
Well, that brings us to another life lesson that I have learned over time, which is life is a progression of plan B. So you're going to be confronted with challenges and obstacles all day, every day. And if you're doing something that you really enjoy, you're going to be interrupted and things are going to come into your awareness that need to be addressed. But that's what life is all about. It's being able to, and we'll talk about this, but it's change. Change is one of the universal laws, and change is happening all of the time with everything. Everything changes except the first three universal laws, which brings up a question what those three things are, which we're not going to address today. But
We'll have to come back again.
but change is happening everywhere, all of the time, to everything. So adapt. That's one of our characteristics, is being able to adapt and to accommodate needs as they arise. So that's just part of life. That's the challenging part of life, is to be productive and aware and put all of the pieces together so that you can follow your passion, do the things you're interested in, but also take care of all the things that need to be taken care of. And if you have families, your husband or children or whatever, they have needs and they need to be addressed. And also you go through seasons in your life where if you're a young mother, your baby is your profound responsibility. And that baby will eventually go to high school and you'll be in a different season, and what you're interested in and what you can apply your time to will be different. So you need to be aware of the seasons that you're in, the activities that are happening in those seasons, and everything breaks down into needs, wants, and desires. And you need to be able to differentiate between those things. Like you were saying with a house, there are some basic things that are needs. You need a kitchen, you need a bedroom, you need a bathroom, you need those things. But if you go to wants, I want maybe a hunting lodge for a home. Someone else might want a Victorian mansion or a very simple thing. And then your desires are kind of how you would decorate that home, what kind of furniture you want, or carpeting and colors and things like that. So if you can differentiate between the needs, wants, and desires, that helps you make a lot of the decisions also. So.
Well, I love the fact that you brought up and reminded us that life is a constant change and that there will be fluctuation in every day. I know that when I hire people, the very first conversation we have is I ask them if they're old enough. Many of them are not old enough, but I ask them, do you remember those little Weeble people? That they're like little egg-shaped people and they kind of wobble. And their slogan was Weeble people wobble, but they don't fall down. And so I said, we are like the Weeble people, where every day we stand up and we're kind of like wobbling, and we may get knocked over, but we're not going to fall down. We're going to wobble back up again. We're going to keep going. But that is our everyday, because we do live in a constant state of emergencies. And with a team of people, there's a family emergency and somebody gets kicked out for the day, and then the workflow has to shift in order to still get everything done, even though that was not on the plan for the day. Just weird random stuff happens. And I guess as long as we're working with humans, that's the case. And so instead of letting everything be chaotic and everything falling apart and everything just coming to a standstill, I've trained everybody to learn their job and then overlap it onto other people's jobs, so that as people fall out or there are emergencies or vacations or whatever, everybody can kind of pivot or wobble and they can still get all the work done by helping a team member out. And so I love that concept of, the constant flux, because that's where we are. I mean, I think that's the norm of our business.
Well, I think any business, every day is a new challenge, and the customer base is changing, and people are affected by the breaking news and things that are happening politically, and we're being propagandized by all kinds of different factors. So we need to be aware of all of those things and be adaptable, but still remain true to our course and what we're trying to accomplish. It's being aware of who we are, where we are, and where we want to be or where we should be. So
I want to highlight the books that you're just finishing right now, because as I've had the chance to read them and go over them, I got really excited. This was a conglomeration of all of the things that I've learned through the course of my life and some things that I haven't learned yet. But it's broken down into segments. I don't want to say they're digestible segments, because I think it's the tip of the iceberg. I think there's so much more underneath the things that you have inside your book. But I love the way that it's broken down into the philosophies and then the insights and then the memorable poems that are brought together to kind of emphasize, here is this lesson. And I'm looking at it in terms of, we talked earlier about how do you know when it's time to move on from one idea to the next. And because of this series and because of the time limit, the limitations that we all have in our lives, I would like to focus on one of those topics per week, so that we can kind of unpack that. Then we can read it, we can learn on it, maybe, think about it for a couple of days, and then meet on Saturdays and go over that particular topic and just unpack it and share our personal stories and insights. And share with me a little bit about your plans for this and how we might use this to learn to love each other better, to learn to live with passion, and then to learn to live with impact and leave a legacy. How can we do that with this series that you've put together?
Well, I think the key is consistency. Like every day, I have a study class. I have one for myself and I have one for my family here at home, where we will take a topic and present it that day. It might be a scriptural thing, or it might be one of the characteristics or something that I've just learned or someone else has learned. I think just continually being engaged in the process of learning and growing and I call it becoming the best version of you. We
Mhm.
all have a version of ourselves, and because of our habits and our lackadaisicalness, we tend to sell ourselves short a lot of times. Our goal should be to be the very best version of ourselves. And in order to do that, you have to understand what all of the characteristics are that make you up. And so the idea of the book is to go through each one of those characteristics. And my goal was to have a very small book, a very thin book that people would look at. I know when I was young, I used to enjoy the Reader's Digest. And in the Reader's Digest, at the bottom of some of the pages, there was a little thought or a quote from somebody, or maybe even a little humorous joke or something. And I would go through the Reader's Digest and look for those first. And then if there was an article that interested me, I would go to that later. So that's why the book instead of having a lot of examples for everything, I wanted the reader to use their own life as the example. If we're talking about a characteristic, I'm going to tell you what the principle is according to holy writings and what we call the wisdom literature that's been handed down through the ages. And that will give you sort of the foundational, the eternal universal laws and principles. And the idea is that you will take your own life and your own habits, your own belief system, your own understanding of things, and compare it to the foundational principles. And then you will adapt and change your life in a very proactive way by conforming your life to those principles instead of your life happening haphazardly. So that was the idea behind it.
Well, I know a lot of our listeners and our viewers are going to want to get a hold of those books. And so I've left links in the show notes below where they can find all of that information and that they can get their own copy and then follow along with us week by week. But I'm really honored and really excited about this series that we're doing on Saturday mornings, which is just a conversational chat where people can ask their questions and we can learn from your wisdom. And also, as we go through the book together, that we can experience some of the different ideas, and then maybe you share some of the how you came up on these ideas and different insights that you've learned and things like that. Because I got so excited when I read it. I was like, oh, this is so good. And I mean, I'm an avid reader. I've been reading my entire life thanks to you, and the way that you brought me up to appreciate good ideas and education, and the little book reports that you did and that I've done. And so I was super excited to see this compilation presented this way. So I'm really excited, and I'm super honored that you're joining me on the weekends because I know how valuable your time is. And so to
Well,
spend this
thank you
with
for
me,
making it all possible.
well, to be able to spend this time with you, I'm honored, and I feel like what a blessing. So thank you for that.
We'll see you next week then.
All righty. For those of you that are joining us, if you have any questions or comments, those go in the notes below. And again, we're going to be here next Saturday at the same time, same place, and we hope you'll join us. Until then, leave
Live with impact.
Live with impact. Okay, let me say that one more time again, and we'll edit that part out. And until we meet again, I can't say it. I can't say it. Thank you for joining us here today. Thank you for joining us here today. And until we meet again, go out there and live with impact. All right, that was it.